Why do the most awake souls hide themselves from society? Why do the people who have seen the deepest truths, who have experienced the most profound transformations, who have access to wisdom that could change lives, why do they withdraw? Why do they stop posting on social media? Stop going to parties? Stop engaging in the shallow conversations that everyone else seems perfectly content with? If you've ever felt this pull to withdraw, to hide, to protect something sacred inside you from a world that doesn't understand it, you're not crazy. You're not antisocial. You might actually be experiencing what Carl Jung called the integration of the shadow and the emergence of the authentic self. And what happens during that process is so misunderstood by society that the only rational response is often to step back and protect what you've discovered. The most awake souls hide not because they're afraid of society, but because they've seen through it, and once you see through something, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to pretending that the emperor is wearing clothes when you clearly see he's naked. Jung spent his life studying consciousness, archetypes, and the process of individuation, which is essentially becoming who you actually are underneath all the conditioning and social programming. And what he discovered is that most people never individuate. They spend their entire lives living out roles that society assigned them, wearing masks that were handed to them, pursuing goals that were never really theirs. They're asleep, but they don't know they're asleep because everyone around them is also asleep, so it looks normal. But then something happens to certain people. A crisis, a loss, a moment of clarity, a dark night of the soul, and they wake up. Not all the way, not immediately, but enough to start questioning everything. Enough to see that the life they've been living isn't authentic. Enough to realize that most of what society values is superficial at best and toxic at worst. And once that awakening begins, there's no going back to sleep. You can't unknow what you now know. You can't unfeel what you felt. You can't pretend that small talk matters when you've touched something infinite inside yourself. Here's what happens neurologically during this awakening process. And this is where modern neuroscience explains why awakened people need to withdraw. When you go through a major shift in consciousness, when your value system reorganizes itself around deeper truths, your brain literally changes. The default mode network, which is responsible for self-referential thinking and social conformity, starts to quiet down. You become less concerned with what others think of you, less motivated by external validation, less interested in maintaining the social persona you've been performing for years. Meanwhile, other networks associated with insight, creativity, and deeper processing become more active. You start seeing patterns you never noticed before. You start questioning narratives you used to accept without thinking. You start feeling uncomfortable in environments that used to feel normal because your nervous system is now attuned to a different frequency. It's not that you think you're better than everyone else. It's that you're literally perceiving reality differently now. And trying to explain that to people who are still operating from the old paradigm is exhausting and often pointless. I know someone who went through this exact transformation. He was always the life of the party, always surrounded by people, always engaged in whatever social scene was happening. Then he went through a period of deep personal crisis that forced him to confront parts of himself he'd been avoiding his entire life. He spent months in therapy, in meditation, in painful self-examination, and when he came out the other side, he was different. Not broken, not depressed, just fundamentally changed. He tried going back to his old social circles, tried having the same conversations, tried caring about the same things, but it felt like wearing a coat that didn't fit anymore. The gossip that used to entertain him now felt poisonous. The status games that used to motivate him now felt hollow. The surface-level friendships that used to feel sufficient now felt like a waste of the limited time he had on this planet. So he withdrew. Not dramatically, not with announcements, but gradually. He stopped accepting invitations. He stopped posting on social media. He spent more time alone, reading, thinking, creating, exploring the internal landscape that had opened up during his crisis. And people noticed. They asked if he was okay. They said he'd changed. Some got offended, thinking his withdrawal was a judgment of them. And in a way it was, not a judgment of their worth as people, but a recognition that their values and his values were no longer aligned, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest for everyone involved. This is what Jung meant when he talked about the loneliness of individuation. When you wake up, when you start living from your authentic self instead of from your social persona, you automatically create distance between yourself and the collective. The collective operates on agreement, on shared delusions, on unspoken contracts that everyone will keep pretending together. We'll pretend this job matters. We'll pretend this status symbol is important. We'll pretend we're all happy when we're actually all anxious. We'll pretend we're all connected when we're actually all isolated. But when you wake up, you break those contracts. You stop pretending. And the collective doesn't know what to do with someone who won't play along, so it tries to pull you back in. It questions your sanity. It accuses you of being negative, of overthinking, of taking things too seriously. It tells you you've changed, and not in a good way. And that social pressure is intense because we're tribal animals. We're hardwired to want to belong, to fear rejection, to conform to group norms. So hiding becomes a form of self-preservation. You're not hiding because you're weak. You're hiding because you're protecting something precious that the collective would destroy if you exposed it prematurely. Think about every spiritual teacher, every mystic, every truly awakened person throughout history. Almost all of them spent significant time in isolation before they could share what they discovered. Jesus in the desert, Buddha under the tree. Jung himself withdrew from public life for years to explore his own unconscious. They weren't hiding because they were antisocial. They were integrating. They were allowing their new understanding to solidify before bringing it into a world that would challenge it, mock it, try to reduce it to something palatable and marketable. Because that's what society does with awakening. It either ignores it or commodifies it. It turns profound insights into Instagram quotes. It reduces life-changing truths into 10-step programs. It takes the raw, uncomfortable, transformative power of real awakening and sanitizes it into something that won't disturb the status quo. And if you're someone who's experienced real awakening, you know instinctively that what you've touched is too sacred to be thrown into that meat grinder. So you hide it. You protect it. You wait until you're strong enough to share it in a way that preserves its integrity. Here's another dimension of why awakened souls hide that Jung understood deeply. When you wake up, you see the shadow in everything, including in yourself. You see the ways society is built on suppressed darkness, on collective shadow material that everyone agrees not to look at. You see the greed masked as ambition, the fear masked as security, the control masked as care, the violence masked as justice. And you also see your own shadow, your own capacity for all of it. That recognition is humbling and terrifying. It destroys any sense of moral superiority you might have had. You realize you're not better than anyone. You're just more aware of the darkness, both out there and in here. And that awareness makes you cautious. You don't trust yourself to speak without projecting your own shadow. You don't trust society to hear truth without twisting it. So you withdraw to do the inner work, to integrate your shadow before you presume to help anyone else with theirs. This isn't cowardice. This is wisdom. This is understanding that real transformation has to happen inside before it can be authentic outside. There's also this. The most awake souls hide because they've discovered that real power is quiet. Society celebrates the loud, the visible, the constantly performing. But Jung knew that the most powerful transformations happen in silence, in darkness, in the hidden depths of the psyche where no audience is watching. When you're awake, you stop needing external validation for your growth. You stop needing to broadcast every insight, every breakthrough, every step forward. You understand that the work is the reward, that the transformation itself is the point, not the recognition for it. So you hide your process, not because you're ashamed of it, but because it's sacred. And sacred things lose their power when they're exposed to profane eyes too early. You're protecting your becoming. You're creating a chrysalis around your transformation so it can complete itself without interference from a world that would interrupt it to ask when you're going to be done and get back to normal. So if you're someone who feels this pull to hide, to withdraw, to protect what's awakening inside you from a society that wouldn't understand it, know this. You're not broken. You're not failing at being social. You're not obligated to maintain relationships that no longer serve your evolution, just because they used to. Jung would tell you that individuation requires you to separate from the collective for a time. Not forever necessarily, but for as long as it takes to become solid in your authentic self. You have to establish your own center, your own values, your own truth before you can engage with society again without being pulled back into its unconsciousness. And some people never come back fully. Some stay on the edges, contributing in quiet ways, living as examples rather than as teachers, holding space for others who are waking up without announcing themselves. That's a valid path. That's a noble path. The world doesn't need more performers. It needs more people who are genuinely awake, even if they're hidden. Especially if they're hidden. Because the most powerful transformations in history have always started in obscurity, with people who withdrew from society long enough to discover something real, something true, something that couldn't be corrupted by the need for approval or applause. So hide if you need to. Protect your awakening. Let it root deeply before you expose it to storms. The world will still be here when you're ready, and you'll know when that is. Not because society gives you permission, but because your own soul tells you it's time.